Hey there guys, it's Editing Live Val. I just wanted to prelude this video to let you know that the rating for Navarro's Promise has dropped from a 2 out of 5 to 1.5 out of 5. Continue watching this video to see why, but that is just something that I wanted to let you know about, considering that when I posted up the short for this video, I had it at a 2 out of 5. It's a 1.5 out of 5, just so you're aware. I appreciate you. Leave comments, questions down, in the comment section below. The back cover of this book, this actual book that was gifted to me many years ago, promises me a heroine who, and I quote, refuses to be claimed. She picked the lock on his bedroom door. He locked it on purpose. Welcome to Navarro's Promise, a review. I am your host, Live Val. I've read all 310 pages, so you don't have to. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Syntax and Stars Theory. 1 part analysis, 2 parts chaos, 5 stars if we're lucky. I am reviewing Navarro's Promise by Lora Leigh, which is book 24 in the Breed series. So if you're new, basically it's a near future world with genetically engineered human-animal hybrids created by a shadowy organization called the Genetics Council. There's fragile legal recognition, protected communities called Sanctuary and Haven. This is a paranormal erotic romance. That is the genre. We are operating inside that genre with full awareness of what that means, and we are still going to hold it to a standard, the Syntax and Stars Theory standard. But before we get into the summary, I need to address the back cover, because the back cover of this book is not an accurate description of the book it is printed on. So the back cover says, what Navarro knows is that she's his mate, and that the breeding and training that created him is being peeled away in his desperation to claim a woman who refuses to be claimed. So, it's about a hero who knows, who is certain.
You sure about that?
Whose desperation to claim is peeling away his training, and a heroine who refuses to be claimed. That is not this book. What the book actually delivers, as far as desperation goes, is on page 160. Her mate was out stomping, cursing, and railing at fate because he had a mate. Stomping, cursing, railing at fate. That is the opposite of desperate to claim. That is a man who is deeply inconvenienced by having a mate.
That doesn't make sense.
And the woman who refuses to be claimed, she picks the lock on his bedroom door on page 89. He had locked it deliberately to be away from her. She picked it with a skill set. We will return to that, though. So the back cover is selling a knowing, desperate hero in conscious pursuit of a resistant heroine. The book delivers manufactured uncertainty sustained by everyone in the story stopping, thinking at the same time. One of those is a romance. The other is a plot hole wearing romance's clothes. And we'll get into exactly how that works when we reach world building, setting, and topic research. Now for the actual quick summary of the book. Here's what the book is actually about. There's the wolf breed Navarro Blaine. He's assigned to protect Mika Toller, a young woman with close ties to the breed community whose life has been threatened. Mika is fiercely independent, has her own plans, and emphatically does not want to be biologically compelled toward any man. The bulk of the book is the collision between her resistance and his increasingly uncontrollable mating heat, alongside a thriller subplot involving a genetics council scientist named Brandon Moore, who has a dangerous interest in both of them. It ends with a happily ever after. This is book 24 in an established universe that assumes significant prior knowledge. I was going to flag spoilers as we go, but you know what? I'm just going to drop it right here. Spoilers galore from this point on. If you don't want to know the spoilers, you want to read it for yourself, click away. But let's go ahead and break it all down. So, category 1, writing style and mechanics. You know the drill. What are we evaluating? Prose quality, sentence structure, voice, tone, and consistency. Does the writing itself work? So let's go ahead and start off with what actually works, because there is something that works. It's in the prologue, and it opens like this. Tall. Male power was an intricate part of his perfectly proportioned frame, which only increased the appeal of height, muscle, and lean deadly grace. He would be perfectly suited for the cover of GQ, in a boardroom or standing, weapon drawn, teeth bared, and facing any enemy. That works. Short, punchy, declarative, immediate sensory grounding. This is competent commercial romance prose doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Clear image, clear character in 4 sentences. Personally, I could do without the whole could be on the cover of GQ because that's just not my personal taste, but to each their own. That's perfectly fine. No docking of points there. That's just a personal preference. But then, approximately 1 paragraph later, or better yet, naked, aroused, and more than ready to possess and conquer a lover too inexperienced to see beneath the surface to the male animal that awaited. We are on page 1. In the prologue, we have been on page 1 for approximately 45 seconds. And here's the structural prose problem that compounds across 310 pages. The book opens at a 10 and has nowhere left to go. By the time chapter 1 closes on page 39, Navarro's single act of restraint in the entire chapter, his most disciplined, controlled thought, is this. He almost winced. No, he could never. A woman like Mika, a man, no matter his species, could only make love to such a woman, whether he allowed himself to love her or not. Page 39. That is the conservative option. That is the floor. The throttle is buried on page 1, and that is him at his absolute most restrained. There is nowhere left to escalate to for the remaining 270 pages by the time we get to page 39. Chapter 3 then opens up on page 57 with what I am now calling this review's Exhibit A for what happens when the maximalist instinct overcorrects. I'm not about to stop. The dark, rich male sex in his voice had her trembling with arousal. The dark, rich male sex in his voice. That is within the first sentence of a chapter. What is male sex as a vocal quality? Is his voice anthropomorphized and gendered that way? Does it have texture? A flavor profile? I've read it several times, this sentence. It collapses into incoherence the harder you look at it. It's trying to be so many sensory things simultaneously that it ends up meaning none of them. This is the flip side of the repetition problem. When Leigh leans on her standard toolkit, if you've read any of her other novels, slick, heated, hunger, cycling through on almost every page, it's monotonous, but technically coherent. When she reaches for something new and vivid, she occasionally produces a phrase that means everything and nothing at once. And the toolkit dominates. Open this book to a random page. I dare you. 4 times out of 5, you are in a sex scene. Not a scene with, sexual tension running underneath it, not a scene escalating towards something. It's a sex scene. The sequences of these sexual moments are not punctuation after built tension. They are not peaks. They are the default state of the book, which is a prose problem before it is a structural one. Because if your baseline is always maximum heat, the moments that should register as different have no room to land differently. The dual third-person point of view alternates clearly enough to follow, but both voices are functionally identical. Both characters think in sensation-forward fragments using the same vocabulary, the same sentence rhythm, the same emotional register. Remove the chapter break headers, remove the dialogue tags, and I genuinely could not tell you whose head you were in. Voice is character. When both characters sound the same, you've lost half your cast on the page. Now, I do want to go into the naming convention for all the other characters. There's a lion breed who leads the entire breed community. His name is Callan Lyons. The lion breed, named Lions.
I forgot how to laugh.
Beside him stands Law Justice, who is presumably very committed to both of those concepts.
You serious?
The coyote second in command is named Brim Stone. This is the same maximalist instinct as the prose. Nothing's implied, everything's stated at full volume. Somewhere there's a wolf breed named Hunter Fang living his best life in a forest somewhere, and we will never meet him. What a shame. I also want to flag two specific craft failures before we move on. Page 25 describes his voice as having the dark Asian flavor of his tone. Navarro. Navarro is confirmed on page 47 as Asian American. His ethnicity is real, his heritage is real, and the book describes the sound of his voice as having an Asian flavor. That is a reductive descriptor that flattens an enormous and diverse set of cultures, languages, and peoples into a single vague aesthetic note. It is lazy writing at minimum. And page 275 contains the phrase, a grimace of pleasure.
What?
A grimace is a facial expression of pain, disgust, or discomfort. The book uses it to describe sexual pleasure. These are not synonyms. That is the wrong word to use. I will also note that pages 298 through 301 stage what appears to be a sex scene that begins in a hallway with no furniture and arrives 3 pages later at a bed with a blanket with no transition, no staging, and no explanation of where either piece of furniture came from. The book simply moves location and assumes the reader will not notice. I definitely noticed. It just looked like they started having sex in a hallway. And then all of a sudden you have a bed, and it's like, where'd that come from? What is happening?
That doesn't make sense.
I've read that section like 4 or 5 times in pursuit of reading this book for this review. I could not tell you how they got from a hallway to a bedroom, I'm assuming, or maybe they're still in the hallway. I have no idea what the heck happened, but it looks like a chunk of the book is missing. Or the author decided to do something else, go from the hallway to a bedroom, and then just kind of forgot to write the transition? I'm not exactly sure what happened there.
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
So, all in all, for writing style and mechanics, I have to grade it 2.5 out of 5. The fundamentals are present, the prologue works, the dialogue has real timing in places, but the prose has one register and uses it for everything, which means the moments that should land differently don't. And then, on top of everything else, you remove the dialogue tags. You don't know who the heck's thinking what. You have no idea who's talking. And And then just the, like, how everything kind of works at a sentence level, grimace of pleasure. Really? You know what I think of when I hear the word grimace? That purple monster thing from McDonald's. That's what I think about, and let me tell you, I am not in the mood for that guy. So, 2.5. And that's me being generous. All right, category 2, plot and story structure. We are looking into narrative construction, pacing, stakes, structural cohesion, and resolution. Does the story work? This book is attempting to be two things: a paranormal romance and a light thriller. Let me show you both failing at that. So the pacing. Chapter 1 ends on page 39 with the restraint line we already covered. By chapter 2, page 50, they are already physically intimate, Navarro and Mika. By chapter 3, page 62, Navarro has broken off with her intimately and has immediately drawn a gun because there is a threat outside. That is 23 pages from heroic restraint to gun drawn. These two are the biological equivalent of teenagers making catastrophically bad decisions in a horror movie. And I mean that structurally. If this were a horror movie, they would have been dead by chapter 2. Because the mating heat doesn't just undermine the romantic tension, it undermines the thriller tension too. You cannot build suspense around an external danger that the main characters are too occupied to take seriously. Every time Brandon Moore's threat escalates, anytime he has any of his cohorts come along to try to, cause chaos, the heat, the sex scenes, the tension, the sexual tension escalates faster. Before the villain, though, I need to flag something on page 22. Mika is established as an accountant, not a journalist, an accountant. And yet she is lured out of safety by a waiter at a local cafe near her home before she even runs into Navarro in this book. And the waiter claims to have information for a story. Why would a source contact an accountant? Why would a source... Why would a source of information contact an accountant with journalistic tips?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Even if he knew her friend Cassie was a journalist, why wouldn't he just contact Cassie? And even if he couldn't get a hold of Cassie and thinks, oh, the only person I could get a hold of is Mika and I'll just contact her, why doesn't Mika just either A, give the waiter Cassie's contact information, or B, gets Cassie involved somehow? So ultimately, why would Mika, knowing she writes no stories, follow up on one?
That doesn't make sense.
This is never addressed. The book simply has her behave like a reporter because the scene requires it and moves on. Now, let's talk about Brandon Moore. Because the way this book handles its villain is the most complete structural failure in the book. Page 66, chapter 4, opening. In the middle of establishing the current situation, the book tells us in a single paragraph that Brandon Moore has previously escaped Sanctuary's secured cells for 12 full hours. Long enough, the book says, to contact his network and create a mess that Jonas is still cleaning up. One paragraph. Past tense. Backstory. The fact that your villain has already escaped once and made contact with his people is delivered as background information in a chapter opening. Granted, at the bottom of the page, but it's the first page. Page 70, Brandon Moore is currently secured in underground cells underneath Sanctuary. We know because of a single throwaway paragraph in a longer sentence. One paragraph. Or one section of a sentence, I should say. Not within a paragraph. Now, pages 94 and 95, Brandon Moore somehow escapes again and fires a blaster. He is in a heavily secured underground cell and he fires a blaster. The book's own response to this is essentially, how did he get a blaster? He's immediately recaptured. The question of the weapon is not answered at this point. A partial answer arrives 161 pages later. Also on page 95, both Navarro's and Josiah's senses fail simultaneously at the moment Brandon Moore acts. Given that Navarro's senses are more advanced than 90% of breeds, which we will get to in characters, their simultaneous failure is notable. Navarro's and Josiah's, which is another character. The book notes it too, and then moves on without explanation. Even if Josiah's senses fail him, Navarro's shouldn't, because supposedly his senses are 90% more attuned. Granted, nobody else knows this, except for Navarro. So how do his senses fail? And then Brandon Moore is off the page. The gap between his page 95 recapture and his next meaningful appearance at page 256 is 161 pages. He is not mentioned as an active threat. He is not developing anything. He is in the basement. The entire second act of the book, the thriller thread, is in the basement with him.
Are you serious?
Pages 256 through 295, the spy plot, the second escape, the confrontation. Brandon Moore lures Mika to a location using a note written in Ellie's handwriting, which Ellie is the doctor of, is like the breed doctor of like the whole community, basically. She's the one that like determines like mating heat, things of that nature. But Brandon Moore delivers an exposition dump explaining the mating heat biology the book has been muddying for 200 pages. He does not threaten Mika during this confrontation, when it's just him and Mika, but Brandon Moore is recaptured and he dies at page 304. And then the epilogue tells us, the history of Philip Brandon Moore's evil had spanned 80 years, and more deaths than anyone could have guessed. And it wasn't just breeds. He'd been an equal opportunity murderer. 80 years. More deaths than anyone could have guessed. Equal opportunity murderer. One paragraph. After he is already dead. The book acknowledges the true scope of its villain in the epilogue and gives it less weight than Mika's father's opinion of her and Navarro's mating. That is the thriller thread's epitaph. And here's what makes it most frustrating. Brandon Moore's motivation, which the book gives us on page 104 in a single paragraph, is actually compelling. A breed hormonal concoction Brandon Moore had created to cure the cancer killing him and to stop the aging of his decrepit body. Instead, he'd created a serum that was slowly rotting his body. So he's a dying man who created the people he now exploits, the breeds. In a desperate bid to survive his own experiment, he goes on to experiment on the breeds. That is a genuinely interesting villain. The book introduces it in one paragraph on page 104 and returns to the sex scenes. It had an interesting thriller, the book did, and it actively chose not to write it. That is part of a larger pattern of abandoned premises. Sanctuary is described on page 77 as one of the most beautiful prisons in the world. Beauty as captivity, safety as confinement. There is a whole thematic argument sitting in that sentence about what the breeds have built for themselves and what it costs them. Leigh writes it and moves on. It gets one sentence and is never returned to. Navarro is the heir to the Blaine media empire. Introduced page 14, never mentioned again, zero bearing on anything. Why'd you bring it up then? And a final structural note, the first physical confirmation that Navarro's mating heat is actually developing, the mating glands just slightly larger than normal for the first time, around like his tongue, because that's how their biology works in this world. It arrives on page 299, 11 pages before the end. After the relationship with Mika is essentially resolved, the biological proof that the mating heat is real and they are actually mates, him and Mika, it arrives when it can no longer change anything, when it has no bearing and no stakes on anything. They chose each other. They know they're mates. Why is it mentioned? Why is it mentioned so late? So plot and story structure, 1.5 out of 5. The happily ever after lands, which I will get to a little bit later. The final lines are warm. One structural beat working at the very end. The rest, a villain with 80 years of history, given 15 pages of presence, a thriller thread that spends the entire middle act in the basement, a love story paced so fast it undermines its own tension, and abandoned premises that were more interesting than what the book chose to write instead. So yeah, 1.5 out of 5. It failed pretty spectacularly. Category 3, characters and development. We're looking at character depth, motivation, growth, consistency, and relationship dynamics. Evaluated against the book's primary goal, telling a love story the audience can invest in. This book is trying to tell a love story. That means it needs characters whose emotional journey is coherent and whose relationship feels earned.
You sure about that?
Evaluated against that standard, this is the weakest category in the book. And I want to work through everyone because the failure is consistent across the full cast in different ways. We have Mika Toller. Mika is introduced with genuine energy. She talks back, refuses to be managed, and on page 47, she delivers the best single line in the book. Yep, that was her. The ostrich. That is self-aware, funny, and completely in character, especially in context because she's trying to say she's the ostrich when it comes to this mating heat that she's feeling towards Navarro. The book immediately abandons the self-awareness, though, that it took to write, and it does not return to it. On page 89 is where her character arc becomes its own argument against the book. Navarro has locked his bedroom door deliberately, trying to stay away from Mika. At page 89, Mika believes, based on Dr. Ellie's definitive assessment, well, actually, at this point, I don't believe it's Dr. Ellie, it's Dr. Nikki, who is mentioned in the prologue. Based on the doctor's definitive assessment, Mika is not Navarro's mate. The biology excuse is explicitly off the table, and she picks the lock to his bedroom door anyway. The book is asking us to receive this as passion. What the text actually shows is a woman making a fully conscious decision to pursue a man she has been told will never truly be hers, knowing it will break her heart, overriding a boundary he deliberately set with a skill set.
Are you fucking kidding me?
And it's frustrating because the book treats this intrusion on his boundaries as, he's a guy. Who cares? He's a dude. That's problematic. He deliberately closed himself off from her. Why is that okay? And now on page 136, after the fact, far, far into the book, much later on from page 89, Navarro breaks into her room. I knew I should have locked the damn door, is what she says. This is framed as charming self-awareness. What it is, though, is an acknowledgement that she violated his deliberately set boundary, and the book does not ask whether that was acceptable. His autonomy is not considered. She says she should have locked the door, meaning he had the right to lock his, and the book presents this as an endearing moment rather than examining what she just acknowledged. The book is treating his invasion on her locked door as a problem, but when it came to her breaking into his room, it's fine. He's a dude, he's fine. But for her, oh no, that's totally not okay. So her arc cycles through 3 incoherent positions. Position 1, I refuse this whole mating thing, this whole whatever I feel for Navarro. Position 2, I know I'm not his mate. Biology's off the table, but I'm picking the lock anyway. Position 3, oh wow, I am his mate after all, but he's not reacting the way I hoped. Now I'm heartbroken from a different direction. Hooray! 3 separate sources of drama generated and discarded, each requiring you, the reader, to forget the previous one. Chapter 6 opens on page 107 with this. Sorry, page 107. If I didn't already state that, I'm pretty sure I said 106, I meant 107. He lied to her. Lying on the gurney of the examination room, Mika kept her eyes closed, her arm thrown over her face despite the additional pain the position caused. Perhaps it was just that time of the month, due to arrive early, or the shock and fear of the past few days. She wasn't a weepy woman, but tears were falling from her eyes like a faucet that insisted on dripping. Except this was silent. It was a misery she couldn't contain, and she didn't understand why. It wasn't as though she hadn't been lied to by someone she loved before. And she processes this lie that Navarro did by noting, hell, Cassie was always lying to her over something, or simply not telling her. A lie of omission was no better, though. Her parents had lied to her countless times over the years. Mika has normalized deception so thoroughly that Navarro's lie of omission joins a pre-existing list without disrupting it. The book intends this as a sympathetic backstory. What it reads as is a portrait of someone who has been conditioned to accept being deceived as the baseline of every significant relationship she has. That is not character depth. It is the mechanism by which the book asks you to absorb Navarro's sustained dishonesty without feeling the weight of it. Then we have Navarro Blaine. Navarro Blaine is an Asian American wolf breed, confirmed on page 47, where the text states that other breeds could find nothing but his human genetics, and humans could find nothing but his normal Asian American genetics. His nickname for Mika, Amaya, which that's not a nickname, that's just a nickname should sound like it's a shortening of a name, not lengthening of a name.
That doesn't make sense.
We'll go ahead and just blaze right past that. It's just annoying to me. Maybe that's just a me thing. His nickname for Mika, though, Amaya, is Japanese for night rain, given to her years ago despite them barely knowing each other. Hey there, guys. It is Editing Live Al again. Just to interject, even though it says online that Amaya means night rain in Japanese, I actually did a little bit more research into it because I really wanted to know for sure. As it turns out, when you actually put it into Google Translate, which, you know, I get it. Lots of people had some hang-ups about whether or not Google Translate does a good job about translating things accurately. But I also did cross-reference after doing this. But with Google Translate, I found out that Amaya just means Amaya in Japanese. It actually doesn't mean anything. And then I even looked online. There were some like Reddit posts and stuff that stated, oh, Amaya means night rain. But those were usually posted up by people that don't speak Japanese as their first language, who weren't growing up in Japan. But the people who do speak Japanese fluently, who did grow up in Japan, who has Japanese as their first language, Amayo is actually described as rainy night. That's Amayo, not Amaya, which I know a lot of people will probably be like, well, what's the difference? There's a huge difference. There's also the word yao, which also means night rain. But yeah, amaya means nothing. It's just a name. It's not very common. In fact, it's actually more times than not a surname if it's a name at all. But it's very rare in Japan, in Japanese. It's not even a nickname anywhere in Japan. But yeah, amayo is rainy night. Yao is night rain. Just thought I'd clear that up because, yeah, the author did not do more than surface level research from the looks of it. His voice is described on page 25 as having the dark Asian flavor of his tone. And it's a potentially interesting identity in a genre that skews overwhelmingly white. The book introduces it and uses it as atmosphere, his heritage. It is never developed, though. His heritage is set dressing. Navarro does not have a character arc. He has a sequence of emotional states that serve individual plot moments. I'm going to take you through the timeline because you need to see the full picture to understand why this score is where it is once we get to that part. So, in the prologue, Mika is irresistible, has been constantly in Navarro's thoughts. Page 27, he's had years of erotic dreams about her, turning hotter each time. Page 32, we learn he first saw her when she was 15. The incident where she punched Josiah Black in the eye for mocking Cassie, that is the first time he saw her. Navarro. And Josiah, obviously, because, well, he got his eye punched out. Page 38, it says, a part of him that was glad she wasn't his mate, while another part mourned it. Page 38, he is glad she is not his mate. Remember that for later. That's very important. So, page 47, the book establishes that his senses are more advanced than 90% of breeds despite his recessed genetics. He knows this. He has been allowing people to believe his senses are recessed. Page 51, kissing Mika feels like mating heat. Then in the same passage, he says he may never know what mating heat feels like. Same page. He experiences the symptom and denies the diagnosis simultaneously. What? The symptoms are rather, well, at first they're clear cut, like I said at first, but then like later on in the story, it just kind of goes back and forth, a little wishy-washy about what the symptoms are. I don't know if the book can pinpoint exactly what the heck is supposed to be going on regarding all of that. It just, later on in the book, it just doesn't really commit. And that's a big problem. On page 75, the deception is explicit. The false amusement in her voice would have fooled most humans, perhaps even a breed whose senses were recessed. His weren't recessed, though, despite what he'd led her to believe.
Are you fucking kidding me?
So this is not a misunderstanding. This is not a cover identity necessity. He has led Mika to believe his senses are recessed. He's a recessed breed, but his senses are not recessed. That is active, sustained deception. He can detect things she doesn't know he can detect. He has been sensing the mating heat building, and he has been saying nothing. Page 107, chapter 6, opens up with that he lied to her. That lie is specifically about his senses. That's at that point where she realizes that he lied to her. And then page 134, even as a woman/child, Mika had an effect on him that made him highly uncomfortable. That's the book's own language. I'm not kidding. Let me pull it up. You can see for yourself. As soon as I read that, I was absolutely shocked. So he's had a physical bodily response to her when she was a child, is what that's saying.
What the fuck?
The paragraph that follows frames staying away from her as the decent response, the act of a man with restraint and principle. The book does not examine what it means that the response existed in the first place. It presents it as evidence of how long and how deeply he has felt this. It is not that. And then page 158, in his own point of view, he knows. He knows exactly what the mating heat means. He knows she is his mate. Page 159, she was mated by a recessed breed, aka him, who showed absolutely no signs. And then page 160, her mate was out stomping, cursing, and railing at fate because he had a mate.
What do you want?
He has been physically aware of her since she was 15, 16, roughly around there. He knew on page 158 and about the fact that they're mates. And then on page 160, he is stomping around cursing fate for giving him the woman he had just spent 30 pages establishing he has wanted. And in the earlier chapters, towards the prologue and everything else, it all established that he wanted her. So him stomping around and cursing fate, this is not genuine internal conflict. This is the book resetting his emotional state to whatever the current chapter requires, regardless of what came before. This is characterization whiplash? Is the best way I could put this? And then there is page 239. If you need to exit stage left, go ahead right now, because the following passage explicitly connects an adult character's sexual response to a 16-year-old, and this occurs inside a sex scene. So, if you need to step away, please do so. All right. So the book drops this. I'm going to let you know right now, it is really hard to read this. 16. And so beautiful. He looked at her and felt the animal stirring inside him for the first time in his life. That is not vague. That is not the mating bond recognized as a metaphysical distance. This is the text explicitly stating that his sexual response, the animal stirring, in his own words, began when she was 16, and it places that statement inside an active sex scene in the book. The book connects his present sexual activity to his first physical response to a teenager in the same paragraph, during sex, as though that is evidence of how deeply he loves her. The book does not notice this is a problem. There is no genre framework, no biology, no mythology, no wolf breed genetics that makes this acceptable. Not for any reason, not in any context, and it does not get undone by what comes after it. Pages 284 and 285 gives us the sleeping confession. I love you, Mika. He whispered the words in her ear, barely loud enough to hear himself as he closed his eyes and tightened his arms around her. God, he loved her. In isolation, outside of this book, this is moving. It's a private declaration to someone who cannot receive it, but consider what it means that this is the only version of honesty he can really manage at this point. He says it when she is unconscious and there is no risk and no consequence. The most emotionally truthful moment this man has in 310 pages is one he only manages because she cannot hear him. That is not just a quiet romantic beat. That is a portrait of a man who has never allowed himself to be seen. The book intends it as romantic. The text shows something else. I also need to note page 238, because he commands, "Take off the robe, Mika. Don't make me tear it off." That is delivered while he is in an explicitly described animalistic, uncontrolled state. The book frames her compliance as passion. The threatening language and his stated inability to control himself make this a scene where the question of consent is genuinely present. The book does not ask that question. These are not complex character behaviors. They are bad character behaviors that make the love story worse at its primary job. The contradiction timeline is not the book being nuanced. It is the book failing to maintain a consistent internal life for its hero because it needs him to feel different things in different chapters, regardless of what came before. And then we have Cassie. Cassie is Mika's best friend, supposedly, and the full timeline of her behavior across the book, and it's this. We have page 4, Mika explicitly trusts her. It states so. Page 6, Mika has known about Cassie's supernatural gifts since they were children. Page 18, Cassie internally confirms that Mika is Navarro's mate. She senses it. She tells Mika nothing. Page 107, as we already read, Cassie always lies to Mika, normalized as the baseline of the friendship. Then page 217, Cassie breaks down and admits she knew all along about the mating. She feared Navarro would betray Mika. Page 218, Mika forgives her quickly. Page 288, Cassie senses that Mika is pregnant with a baby boy. Page 307, there is a third exchange between them, a third "you knew" moment. This one, very likely about the pregnancy, but it's like the wording is so vague and the question is so out of left field in context that I can only assume it was about Mika being pregnant, but I can't be honestly sure about that. So if anybody's read this book or they're going to read this book, please let me know, because that part really genuinely confused me. But then after page 217, Cassie largely disappeared from the book until she shows back up towards the very tail end, like in the epilogue. So 3 times, Cassie knows something significant about Mika's life, withholds it, is eventually found out, and Mika forgives her. The book treats this pattern as Cassie bearing an endearing supernatural burden. The book never asks what it means for a friendship that its most central dynamic is one person consistently choosing not to tell the other things she absolutely should. And Mika knows about Cassie's gifts from childhood, so it's not like it's something that was hidden from her. It's not like something that Mika's like, "Oh, I had no idea you had this gift." She knew. But never once does Mika think to ask Cassie whether Navarro is her mate. She could ask her, but the book cannot allow that question, because an honest answer from Cassie would collapse the entire manufactured drama of Mika's heartbreak arc immediately. The book keeps Mika from asking the obvious question because the story needs her not to know. That is not character logic. That is the author's hand visible on the page. And then we've got the secondary cast. We have Jonas Wyatt. He is the calculating, consistent, kind of tactical, kind of operative that uses everyone around him as chess pieces and delivers most of the tactical exposition, is right about everything by the end. He's well drawn as a type, but he has no arc of his own. The most interesting question about Jonas, whether someone who treats people as strategic assets is fit to lead a community built around protection and belonging, is never asked. Then we have Marinus Lyons. She appears twice. Her first appearance at page 78 through 81 contains the best natural dialogue in the book. She is warm, politically sharp, and entirely alive as a person. She tells Mika, "I refuse to allow anyone in the house to discuss anything depressing before I've eaten." That's on page 79. Her second appearance on page 161 gives us, "There's coffee and chocolate cake. I've been indulging today. 2 scenes. The book gives her 2 scenes. They are the warmest and most natural scenes in the book. There's obviously more beyond those little quotes that I just put here. But ultimately, she has those 2 scenes. The dialogue she has with Mika is absolutely entertaining. It's funny. It's warm. And then all of a sudden, Marinus is gone. She deserved significantly more page time. The book chooses sex scenes instead. Then we have Josiah Black. A warmth with Mika that extends beyond the punching incident when Mika and Cassie were kids. I'm not sure about how old Josiah is. That's never established. Fine, whatever, we'll move on. But there's a warmth with Mika that extends beyond that punching incident. Confirmed when he greets her with genuine tenderness and invites her to lunch on page 93. The nature of their history is never really explained. He functions as a jealousy catalyst, appears in a confrontation scene, and then is discarded. Ellie, the doctor that I had mentioned earlier, she is described as a mate without a mate. She runs the mating tests. She has a clearly unresolved history with Navarro that is hinted at and never developed. She is the most interesting secondary character in the book, and the one the book is least interested in using. She is parked in the examination room and brought out when someone needs a blood draw.
What?
And then she's used as like a prop for Brandon Moore to lure Mika down to the examination rooms down below the building, and that's it. But to continue, I need to flag page 119. This, I'm going to let you know, is also very problematic. It is not okay. And I immediately caught this, and I thought it was rather telling of the author. So the warning is that it comes off as homophobic. So if you get genuinely upset by reading or hearing about homophobic things, or at least homophobic adjacent things, because like I said, it comes off like that. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. But just how I read it in the book, it very much sounds problematic. Anyways, if you need to leave, exit stage left. Otherwise, here it is. Ellie asks Mika whether she might be homosexual as an explanation for why the mating heat data is reading anomalously. As in, it's not working how it should. Mika's reaction is described as horrified. Homosexuality is presented as something that would explain away the data and that warrants horror as a response. The book does not examine this. The scene simply moves on. And again, that's so deeply problematic. And Ellie asks whether or not Mika is in a relationship with Cassie, her best friend. Like, I don't know if it was supposed to come across as funny or what, but it came off very cringe.
What the fuck?
And like I said, problematic to me. Again, like I said, I could be reading it wrong, but I did not like that at all. It very much came off as homophobic. And then there's Brandon Moore on page 290, and he's described as, again, also problematic, Brandon Moore on page 290 is described as, and I quote, a fruitcake. Fruitcake carries documented historical usage as anti-gay slang. Whether intentional or not, whether or not that's what the word is, whether or not that's how the word is being used in this book, it is the word applied to the villain of the book, and that is worth noting, intentional or not. The secondary cast flashes and vanishes. None of them sustain across the book in ways that constitute heavy lifting for the story. The lead characters actively undermine the love story they are supposed to be in. The bad character behaviors is in the service of a love story. Don't add anything. It's the bad character behaviors in the service of a love story are not complexity. They are the love story failing at its primary job. So characters and development, 1 out of 5. The ostrich line works for Mika to kind of showcase her self-awareness. Marinus's 2 scenes work. The sleeping confession works in isolation, and quite honestly, outside the boundaries of this story. If it were in another book, I'd say that was good. I like that. In this book, the leads are incoherent in the ways that make the love story worse, not better. And then the whole, like, homophobic slang and the moments where it like I said, it feels homophobic as and it's a problem. 1 star. 1 star for characters and development. Absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. The only things that work is that ostrich line and Marinus's 2 scenes and the sleeping confession. That is it. I would give less, but honestly, the Marinus scenes are the only things that kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting. That's it. And that's me being generous. Category 4, world building, setting, and research. We are looking at setting consistency, atmosphere, internal logic, and the coherence of the constructed world. The Breeze universe has 23 books of infrastructure. That foundation belongs to other entries in the series. What this specific book contributes to its own world building is what we're evaluating here. The best single piece of world building writing in this book is that one line on page 77. Sanctuary was one of the most beautiful prisons in the world. Beauty as captivity, safety as confinement. There is an entire thematic argument in that sentence about what the Breeds have built for themselves and what it costs them. Leigh writes this about Sanctuary and immediately moves on. It gets 1 sentence and is never returned to. Now, the recessed genetics problem in full. Page 13 establishes that the mating tests can only eliminate potential mates. They cannot confirm who someone's mate is, only rule out who it isn't. Dr. Nikki Armani, a wolf breed scientist, has run multiple tests and confirmed there is no chance of Navarro being Mika's mate. Page 14 establishes that Navarro's recessed genetics are visible and known to the entire community. He has no prominent canines. His cover identity is literally heir to the Blame Media empire because he passes as fully human. The information is not hidden. It is visible on page 14. Page 47 tells us his senses are more advanced than 90% of breeds despite his recessed genetics. And page 75 confirms he has been actively cultivating the false impression that they are not. The false amusement in her voice would have fooled most humans, perhaps even a breed whose senses were recessed. His weren't recessed, though, despite what he'd led her to believe. Again, this is Navarro actively deceiving Mika about his senses. So here's the question that the book never asks. Why does a wolf breed scientist give a definitive no chance of mating rather than flagging that recessed genetics might affect how the mating heat functions and therefore how it would read on a test. Why does Jonas, who assigns Navarro, knowing he is recessed, never think to note that complication? Why does Dash Sinclair, Cassie's father, himself a recessed breed, confirmed on page 229 to have known for years that recessed genetics affect mating heat differently, say absolutely nothing to anyone?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
The answer is that the book needed everyone to fail this inference simultaneously. The community had to stop thinking so that Mika could believe she wasn't his mate long enough to pick the lock on his door. The world-building rule was reverse-engineered from a desired dramatic beat, and the rule does not even hold consistently. It blocks the doctor's tests. It does not block Cassie's supernatural perception. It does not block Mika sensing the heat herself. It does not block Navarro knowing on page 158. Applied selectively based on what the plot needs in any given chapter. That is not lore. That is drama wearing lore's clothes. The mating heat rules themselves shift chapter by chapter. Page 5 establishes the mechanics clearly, but across pages 111 through 191, the rules are applied inconsistently at least 8 documented times.
They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
She cannot be in mating heat because she is not physically begging, but she is exhibiting every established symptom. His body sensitivity confirms it, but there is no mating scent. Ellie notes on page 127 that mating heat symptoms are changing and becoming unreliable in their progression. Mating heat is changing. It's becoming very unreliable in its symptoms and progression as well as its reactions from couple to couple. That's on page 127. That is what Dr. Ellie states. Ellie observes that the rules are changing. Nobody in the room connects this observation to the man in the room whose recessed genetics might explain exactly why the rules are changing. The book has the dots. It declines to connect them. Page 146 calls it his addiction while denying it as a mate bond. His addiction to Mika. Page 191 describes a mating, but they're not mated. A distinction the book never explains. So I don't know what the heck I'm supposed to think about that there is a mating between them, but they're not mated.
What? What?
But they mated.
What the fuck?
Like there was a mating, but they're not mates. What? What? Words mean things. And then, and again, that distinction is never explained in the book. You can see I'm visibly getting upset by it because it's mind-bogglingly stupid. Rules are needed. The distinction between mating and mated is never explained. The rules are only thrown in whenever it's convenient, but they don't stay as rules. They're more like
what you call guidelines than actual rules.
Cassie's supernatural gifts are similarly inconsistent throughout the book. She senses future paths, mate bonds, emotional states, contentment, and by page 288, pregnancy and baby gender. The mechanism of these gifts is never explained. The limits are never defined. The inconsistency is what she does and does not sense at any given moment, and those given moments are never addressed. Nothing is addressed. The inconsistency doesn't hold up. So, on the one hand, we have Cassie being like, "Oh, Mika, I sense contentment in your future." But then I also sense that her and Navarro are mates. But then her happiness is actually contingent upon a breed who is not her mate. But what I sense about this breed, it's very faint. Like everything about this other breed and her happiness being in their hands is very faint and blah, blah, blah. But I can tell you're pregnant with a boy.
What the fuck?
What? What? That makes absolutely no sense. It's so specific she can tell the gender and how far along Mika is in the pregnancy, even though they literally just had sex like within a span of days, maybe a couple weeks. So she shouldn't have any any biological changes of pregnancy really yet on any level. How does Cassie's powers work? So Cassie is a wolf coyote hybrid breed, by the way. And so, but her genetics are not recessed as far as I can tell. It's not established in this book if they are or not. So unlike Navarro, who has 90% more tuned up senses, as far as we know, Cassie doesn't. But she has supernatural gifts that she can detect contentment, but she can also detect betrayal, heartache, blah, 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 depending on which route that Mika takes in her life. Like, I'm all for supernatural gifts. I'm all for, like, oh, I sense contentment in your future, but I also sense heartbreak and blah, 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 especially when it comes to this particular person, or maybe taking this particular choice in your life. That's fine. But it's like Mika's happiness is contingent on another breed, but that's kind of faint. Like, let me pull it up. It does not make any goddamn sense, and I'm cursing a lot in this video. That's how upset I am. So, this is on page 18 through page 19. It's still in the prologue. Cassie watched her friend, fighting to hold her expression, fighting to convince Mika everything was fine, to hold back the worry and the concern. She wasn't lying to Mika. The future scent was one of contentment, but it was a potential contentment, a maybe thing. One of the many paths Mika could take. And beside that path was deceit and rage. To the other side was agony and heartache. The path would depend on too many things. It would depend on Mika and on a breed. And the breed it would depend on wasn't Navarro Blaine. And that was the scary part, because the other scent she detected was so slight, so subtle, that Cassie doubted it would even show on tests. That other scent was Navarro's, and a hint of mating heat. Mika was Navarro's mate, but her friend's happiness would lie in another breed's hands, a breed other than her mate.
You sure about that?
Did that make sense? Raise your hand. Anybody in the class? Did that make sense? It sure as hell didn't make sense to me. When I read that, I was like, wait. Her happiness is in another breed's hands, not her mate's, which is Navarro's. The breed it would depend on wasn't Navarro Blaine. The other scent she detected was so slight, so subtle, that Cassie doubted it would even show on tests, which that is established, that is Navarro. Like, multiple times on every test, his breed's genetics are very slight, subtle, doesn't really show on tests. The humans would assume he's human. Sorry, Asian American, because, you know, we gotta shoehorn that in for some ungodly known reason. Because, you know, we're not going to develop that side of his heritage. Why would we?
Are you fucking kidding me?
Asian American. Generic. Let's not explore that. And then, that other scent was Navarro's and a hint of mating heat. So, what does this mean? The breed it would depend on wasn't Navarro, Blaine. That other scent that she detected was so slight, so subtle, that Cassie doubted it would even show on tests. That other scent was Navarro's and a hint of mating heat. Mika was Navarro's mate, but her friend's happiness would lie in another breed's hands, a breed other than her mate. The breed it would depend on wasn't Navarro Blaine. The other scent, and that was the scary part, because the other scent she detected was so slight, so subtle, that Cassie doubted it would even show on tests. I'm sorry that I keep going back over this section over and over and over again here. It just... What does it mean? It reads like the breed it would depend on wasn't Navarro, her mate, right? Because that other scent was so slight, so subtle, that Cassie doubted it would even show on tests. That is tacked on as an afterthought to the breed it would depend on wasn't Navarro. So that makes it sound like this subtle, slight scent is not Navarro. But we've already established Navarro's scent is so slight, so subtle, it wouldn't show on tests. He passes as human. But how it's worded sounds like it's dependent on this other breed that isn't Navarro. But then it says immediately afterwards that other scent was Navarro's and a hint of mating heat. It does not read very well. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not kidding. Am I crazy? Like what? What? How am I supposed to read this? That doesn't make any sense. It's incoherent babble. It is, and that's that is part of the writing style and mechanics. By the way, like I just kind of want to jump backwards a little bit. I should have mentioned that. That goes straight into writing style and mechanics. That doesn't make any sense. It also touches into plot and story structure. Also doesn't make sense. Like, what? Like, am I crazy? Like, I've read it several times, that section. None of it makes sense. None of it. Not a single goddamn part of it makes sense. It depends on somebody else. And whoever this is, they have a scent so slight, so subtle. Oh wait, but that's Navarro's scent. But her happiness depends on somebody who isn't Navarro. Navarro's her mate. His scent cannot show up on tests. Neither can this other one, but this other one is actually Navarro's. Like, what? Babble. Incoherent babble. That's all I read. That is word salad. That is terrible. And that also goes straight into world building, setting, and research. Awful. God awful. I hate it. I hate that section. The first time I came upon that part, I was like, I don't even know what the hell's going on anymore, and I haven't even gotten out of the prologue. That's bad. That is super bad. The limits are never defined as far as Cassie's supernatural gifts are concerned, though, because, like I stated, like, that babbling nonsense was, like, subtle, slight, oh, she can kind of sense things, yada yada, but then she can tell her friend is pregnant with a baby boy towards the end of the book. How? She is miles away when she predicts that, by the way. She's right next to Mika, or as close to being as right next to Mika as humanly, breedly possible, in this prologue. And she can only kind of, sort of detect a future. Ooh. But then she's miles away later in the book, and she's like, she's pregnant with a baby boy. Make it make sense. The inconsistency in what she does and does not sense at any given moment is never addressed. It is never fully explained. Nothing makes sense. The points don't matter. Who cares, I guess? World building, setting, and research, 1.5 out of 5. The series foundation is solid because, again, this is page 24 in an established series. I'm sure the world building might be better explained or written in other books. This entry Navarro's promise does active damage to the foundation of the series. A community-wide logic failure, load-bearing to the entire plot, a mating heat system whose rules are whatever the scene requires, a beautiful premise abandoned in the sentence it's written. 1.5. 1.5. Absolutely not. We're not giving you any more. Like I said, the foundation is solid, very likely. So that's the only reason why it stays at 1.5. Otherwise, I would give this a... Like, if I go through the other books and I find out that the world building is also terribly described in all of those as well, I might go back to this video and give this a full-on 0 for this topic, for this category. We'll see, though. Category 5, emotional and intellectual impact.
You sure about that?
Emotional resonance, thematic depth, intellectual provocation, lasting impact. Did this book actually do something? The final lines of the book are earned. After 300 pages of everything we've just covered, it closes on this. No nightmares ever, she agreed. Just us. Just us, love. Always just us. Simple. Warm, exactly the right choice for a closing line. And the ostrich line on page 47 again is genuinely funny. Marinus's breakfast scenes are warm and alive. These moments work. The sleeping confession works in isolation. Again, if it were completely removed from this book, I'd say it is pretty sweet. If this book were better written, I'd say, yeah, it works. It works. A private declaration to someone who cannot receive it. There is something genuinely moving in the idea of a man only able to say the truest thing he feels when the person he feels it for cannot hear him. That is very honest, it is very sweet, it is very genuine. But that reading is complicated by the full picture of who this man is. He is the most honest when she is unconscious and there is no risk and no consequence. That is not just a romantic beat, that is the portrait of someone who has never allowed himself to be seen, and the book's emotional architecture asks you to receive his eventual confession as the culmination of a great love. The page 239 passage makes that very difficult, though. Because after page 239, investing in this love story means building on a foundation the text has confirmed is wrong. The final lines land in spite of that context, not because of it. And then there's page 298, which delivers this. You can inform Ellie I won't be returning this evening. Until my so-called mate actually begins experiencing this mating crap himself, then I see no reason to torture myself further. That is Mika talking to everybody else in the scene. Because Dr. Ellie isn't there. It's at this part in the story where Mika was tricked into going down into the examination rooms. Ellie is off page. We don't know exactly what happened to her. Which, by the way, that's never really explored. At some point, I think Jonas or Josiah, I'm not exactly sure who, one of those two guys says, oh, Ellie is off doing something or another with the enforcers, blah, 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 blah. It's very like, oh, it explains everything. But we don't really get to know exactly what happened. But Mika was tricked into going down into the examination rooms, which is where she runs into Brandon again, his last scene where he does the whole exposition dump about mating heat. And he doesn't fight her. He doesn't try to kill her. He doesn't try to harm her in any way. He just looks menacingly and then just exposition dumps on her and then is recaptured again and then is eventually killed. Anyways, that's where that line comes from. It's after all that. Or immediately after that. Because she was supposed to go down to the examination rooms to do another test on the mating heat. But this also comes after the intimacy page of pages 284 and 285. She was asleep for the sleep confession thing that Navarro did. Mika did not register it. The warmth of that scene does not carry forward. The book resets her to so-called mate and mating crap 11 pages before the end. Another position discarded. Another reset. During that whole intimate scene, during pages 284 and 285, it doesn't make any sense why she would just all of a sudden like it's almost like she's an Etch-a-Sketch and she forgot that they just had an intimate moment together. And then he confessed his love to her. Granted, she wasn't awake for that, but still, like the whole intimate scene comes off as they overcame a hurdle of differences and decided to about it. And then she had some sort of like emotional release during said, I don't know. But this whole emotional reset is just jarring. And this is like after Brandon Moore was captured again. And like when she was like, oh my God, he's a threat. Brr, brr, brr. And then Navarro comes along with a bunch of other people. They help rescue her, which I don't know what they were rescuing her from because Brandon Moore didn't have a weapon at this point. He just showed up in the examination room, talked at her, and then that was it. But like even without a weapon on her by Brandon Moore, like at least Navarro showed up to rescue her. But all of a sudden now she's all aloof and like, well, until my so-called mate actually begins experiencing this mating crap himself, then I see no reason as to why I should torture myself further. What?
What do you want? What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
Tonal whiplash. Emotional whiplash. Okay, I guess. I mean, the intellectual questions this book raises are genuinely worth asking. About agency versus biological compulsion. About whether desire that is partly programmed constitutes genuine choice. About what it means to build a love story on sustained deception. About a community whose entire existence is built around understanding their own biology, collectively failing to apply that understanding. These are interesting questions. The book raises them and declines to engage with them at every turn. So the emotional and intellectual impact, 1.5 out of 5, because the moments that work are real, the final lines land, the sleeping confession lands differently than the book intends, but it lands. Everything surrounding those moments is doing no emotional or intellectual work at all. And again, the sections, the moments that I got genuinely like deeply insulted and angry about, it just, there's no emotional or intellectual impact to be had, really. Like I said, those few little spatterings are the only things that are holding emotional and intellectual impact together at 1.5. That's it. All right, final score. Let's do the math, shall we? It's going to be quick. Writing style and mechanics, 2.5. Plot and story structure, 1.5. Characters and development, 1. World building, setting, and research, 1.5. Emotional and intellectual impact, 1.5. Together, we have 8 out of 25 points. We divide that 8 by 5. We have a 1.6. But I'm going to round it down to 1.5 because I am genuinely still upset by the consistency of Cassie's powers and the fact that nobody could piece anything together, and the fact that the sex scenes completely eclipsed everything else about this book. The plot was flimsy at best. The villain was criminally underutilized. His motivation was just swept under the rug. There were good bones here for a good, compelling story. I don't mind the sex scenes. It's just, if that's all it is, what's the point? So 1.5 out of 5 stars. We are not awarding a bonus star. Nothing in this book earns that bonus star. And that is the hill I'm dying on. Navarro's Promise had genuinely compelling raw material. A dying villain who created the people he now exploits in a desperate bid to survive his own experiment. A hero whose recessed genetics actually do complicate the mating bond mythology in a potentially interesting way. A secondary cast with real flashes of warmth. An Asian American lead whose identity the book introduces, but unfortunately the book declines to develop it. There's a thriller premise with genuine stakes, but the book chose not to write it. The book spent the majority of its 310 pages on heat sequences, on sex scenes, sexual tension, doing no narrative work. The lead characters have behaviors that actively undermine the love story they are supposed to be in, a mating heat system maintained through community-wide logical failure, and rules that just get tossed out the window at a moment's notice, and a villain whose 80 years of evil earns one epilogue sentence. Cassie deserved her own book, which I'm pretty sure actually she does end up getting her own book at some point. But more on that later, perhaps. Brandon Moore deserved 10 more pages and a proper confrontation. Ellie deserved a storyline. And again, I haven't looked at all the other books. Maybe Ellie did get her own storyline. I have no idea, genuinely. The beautiful prison line about Sanctuary deserved a chapter, at most. The Blame Media Empire air detail deserved to actually mean something in the book. The book had better ideas than it was willing to use, and the ideas it did have about its hero are more disturbing than it recognizes. Again, that, like, characters and development definitely earn that 1 star. There's only a couple of good parts with other characters, but Navarro really, his characterization damaged that category very, very significantly. So, 3 questions before I go. The whole point of this channel is that we want to hear where you disagree with me. 1. Mika picks the lock on page 89 knowing she is not Navarro's mate, knowing it will break her heart, with the biology explicitly off the table at this point in the story. The book never asks whether she violated his deliberately set boundary. Does the text extend the same scrutiny to his autonomy that it extends to hers? Is this a problem? Honestly, in my opinion, it really is. Question number 2. Brandon Moore's evil spanned 80 years. He was responsible for more deaths than anyone could count, and his motivation was a dying man trying to survive his own experiment because he was dying from cancer. He gets 4 sentences of development and 15 pages of presence across 310 pages. Is a compelling villain premise that goes unused worse than no premise at all? I shouldn't say unused, more like underutilized. Is a compelling villain premise that goes underutilized worse than no premise at all? Honestly, I think so. And 3, Navarro is Asian American in a genre that skews overwhelmingly white in its leads. The book introduces his identity and uses it as atmospheric flavor. What responsibility does a genre with a known representation problem have when it introduces a non-white lead and declines to develop who that person actually is? Drop your answers in the comments. Come fight me. I will see you in the next one.